For years, Americans have been told that inflation is slowing and that the economy is stabilizing. On paper, that appears to be true. Inflation rates have dropped significantly from their peaks, and economists suggest that the worst is behind us. However, everyday experience tells a different story. Walk into a grocery store, check your rent, or pay your utility bills, and it becomes clear that the financial pressure has not disappeared. The real issue in the United States today is not just inflation, it is affordability. Prices have risen across nearly every essential category, and even though the rate of increase has slowed, the overall cost of living remains significantly higher than it was just a few years ago. For millions of Americans, this has created a persistent sense of financial strain that is difficult to ignore. The misleading comfort of lower inflation. At first glance, the economic situation seems to be improving. Inflation rates have settled closer to what policymakers consider normal, hovering around the 2–3% range. This has been widely presented as a sign that the economy is recovering. However, this interpretation can be misleading. Lower inflation does not mean that prices are falling. It simply means that prices are rising more slowly than before. After years of rapid increases, the baseline cost of living has shifted upward. This means that even though inflation is no longer surging, the higher prices remain. In practical terms, Americans are now living in a new economic reality where goods and services cost more than they used to, and there is little indication that prices will return to previous levels. This creates a long-term burden rather than a temporary challenge. Grocery prices, a daily reminder of rising costs. Food prices provide one of the clearest examples of how the cost of living has changed. While overall food inflation has slowed compared to previous years, grocery bills remain noticeably higher. Many essential items have experienced significant price increases, making everyday shopping more expensive. Products like coffee, meat, and fresh produce have seen sharp price spikes in recent years. Supply chain disruptions, climate factors, and global demand have all contributed to these increases. Even when certain items become cheaper, the overall cost of a typical grocery basket remains elevated. This creates a consistent financial pressure on households. Unlike other expenses that occur monthly or annually, groceries are purchased frequently, making price increases more visible and more impactful. As a result, many Americans feel the effects of inflation most strongly when buying food. Housing costs, the core of the crisis. Housing remains the single largest expense for most Americans, and it is also one of the most challenging areas in terms of affordability. While home prices have stabilized or even declined slightly in some regions, this has not translated into meaningful relief for buyers. Mortgage rates remain relatively high, making home ownership more expensive despite stable prices. At the same time, rents continue to rise in many areas, driven by demand and limited supply. For many households, housing costs now consume a significant portion of income, often exceeding 30% or even 40%. In addition to rent or mortgage payments, other housing-related expenses have also increased. Utility costs, property taxes, and insurance premiums have all risen, adding further pressure. This makes housing not just expensive, but increasingly difficult to manage over the long term. Energy prices and their wider impact. Energy costs play a critical role in shaping the overall economy, and recent increases have had widespread effects. Gasoline prices have risen again in many parts of the country, influenced by global supply constraints and geopolitical factors. The impact of energy prices extends far beyond fuel costs. Higher energy prices increase the cost of transportation, manufacturing, and distribution. This, in turn, raises the prices of goods and services across the board. For households, this means paying more not only at the pump, but also indirectly through higher prices for everyday items. Rising utility bills further compound the issue, especially during periods of extreme weather when energy demand is higher. Wage growth and the purchasing power gap. One of the most important aspects of the current situation is the relationship between wages and prices. While wages have increased in recent years, they have not kept pace with the overall rise in the cost of living. This has led to a decline in real purchasing power. Even if individuals are earning more in absolute terms, their ability to afford goods and services has diminished. This creates a sense of financial stagnation, where progress feels limited despite nominal income growth. For many workers, the gap between income and expenses continues to widen. This makes it more difficult to save money, invest, or achieve long-term financial goals. Over time, this imbalance can have significant economic and social consequences. The rise of debt as a coping mechanism. As the cost of living increases and purchasing power declines, many Americans have turned to debt as a way to maintain their standard of living. Credit cards, personal loans, and other forms of borrowing have become essential tools for managing everyday expenses. Household debt levels have reached record highs, with credit card balances increasing significantly. This trend indicates that people are not necessarily able to cover rising costs with their income alone. While borrowing can provide short-term relief, it also creates long-term challenges. Interest payments add to financial burdens, and high levels of debt can limit future financial flexibility. This makes debt both a solution and a risk within the current economic environment. The hidden burden of service costs. In addition to goods, the cost of services has been rising steadily. Expenses such as healthcare, education, childcare, and insurance have increased significantly, often outpacing general inflation. These costs are particularly challenging because they are often unavoidable. Families cannot easily reduce spending on healthcare or childcare without affecting their quality of life. As a result, rising service costs place a disproportionate burden on households. For example, childcare expenses have increased dramatically in recent years, making it more difficult for families to balance work and family responsibilities. Similarly, healthcare costs continue to rise, forcing some individuals to delay or forgo necessary treatment. Why the crisis feels worse than it looks. Despite relatively stable inflation rates, many Americans feel that the economic situation is worsening. This perception is rooted in lived experience rather than statistical measures. People do not experience inflation as a percentage. Instead, they experience it through specific increases in their expenses. A higher rent payment, a more expensive grocery bill, or rising utility costs all contribute to a sense of financial pressure. These increases are cumulative. Even if prices are no longer rising rapidly, the higher cost base remains. This creates an ongoing strain that is difficult to alleviate, leading many individuals to feel that their financial situation is deteriorating. The role of policy and global factors. The current cost of living challenges are the result of multiple interconnected factors. Pandemic-related disruptions initially triggered inflation, while subsequent policy decisions and global events have continued to influence prices. Trade policies, including tariffs, have contributed to higher costs for certain goods. Geopolitical tensions have affected energy prices, while interest rate increases have made borrowing more expensive. These factors interact in complex ways, making it difficult to address the issue through a single solution. Instead, the affordability crisis reflects a broader set of economic dynamics that continue to evolve. The psychological impact of financial pressure. Beyond the economic data, rising costs have had a significant psychological impact. Many Americans report feeling stressed, uncertain, and financially insecure. Living paycheck to paycheck has become more common, even among middle-income households. This reduces financial resilience and makes it harder to cope with unexpected expenses. As a result, individuals are making difficult choices, such as delaying major life decisions or cutting back on discretionary spending. This not only affects individual well-being, but also has broader implications for economic growth and stability. Signs of stabilization and limited optimism. Despite the challenges, there are some signs of improvement. Inflation has slowed, and certain categories, such as used cars, have seen price declines. Wage growth, while insufficient, remains positive. These developments suggest that the situation is not deteriorating at the same pace as before. However, they do not fully address the underlying affordability issues. The key challenge is that stabilization does not equate to relief. Prices may no longer be rising rapidly, but they are still high, and for many households, this continues to create financial strain. What the future may hold. Looking ahead, the trajectory of prices in the United States will depend on several factors. Continued declines in inflation could gradually improve affordability, especially if wage growth accelerates. However, there are also risks. Energy price fluctuations, policy changes, and global economic conditions could trigger new increases. The possibility of renewed inflation cannot be ruled out. In the most likely scenario, the economy will experience gradual adjustment rather than rapid improvement. This means that the cost of living challenges faced by Americans are likely to persist in the near term. A new economic reality. The situation in the United States today is not defined by extreme inflation, but by sustained high prices. This represents a shift from a short-term crisis to a long-term adjustment. Americans are not just dealing with rising costs, they are adapting to a new baseline where everyday expenses are permanently higher. Until wages catch up or structural changes occur, this pressure will remain. Ultimately, the cost of living crisis is not about dramatic economic collapse. It is about a slow, persistent squeeze that affects millions of households. And while it may not always dominate headlines, its impact is felt every day in the lives of ordinary people. And maybe the real question isn't how bad prices are getting, but how long people can keep adapting before something breaks. If this gave you a clearer picture of what's really happening behind the headlines, there's a lot more you need to understand next. So make sure you like and subscribe, because the next video might change how you see money forever.